Good evening, community. Good evening to all casual listeners who are not yet part of Tales of the Night. Welcome everyone, and I truly hope from the bottom of my heart that the following supernatural horror stories will help you escape for a while. For a few moments, from the real terror that is out there every day, especially on days like these. Hopefully, you can all let yourselves be carried away by the stories we have prepared and selected for you tonight. Today's tales are extremely interesting. As you will see, there are encounters on roads with creatures that seem to have no logical explanation, encounters with witches, and even those phenomena that have happened to people who are sure it has to do with listening to this program. But of course, we have to invite you not to listen to that particular story if you are suggestible. We will leave that one until the end and warn you before it starts. But for now, it is time to begin and move on to the first tale of the night. Hello Uriel, how are you? My name is Cuauhtémoc. This is the first time I'm sharing something for the program, although I have been a fan for a long time. Today, I want to share with you and the entire community an experience I had on the outskirts of my town, near La Perla Tapatía in Guadalajara, Jalisco. Before reaching it, about 30 minutes away, you can enter Cerro de las Ventanas, a mountain range with spectacular views, widely used for cycling routes, long bike rides, although it is being used less and less because the area, like many other places in the country, has become quite unsafe. But there, in that place, on those routes, this story begins. About 3 years ago, with my cycling group at the time, we went to tour that route, those landscapes. There was a moment when I went ahead, because with all the water I had drunk, like a good cyclist, I wanted to stop to go to the bathroom. I went far ahead to do it before the others arrived. I stopped and got off the route. I started walking through the mountain range and reached a ravine. It had a beautiful view that I didn't remember having seen before. I settled behind a tree so that my companions wouldn't see me if they caught up. When I heard women's laughter in the distance, it seemed normal to me. I assumed it was the group that was approaching, chatting or laughing. In fact, I yelled out that I was coming, that they should wait a moment. I received no response. Then I heard voices again, but I didn't understand what they were saying. I realized they were not the girls from my group. I realized that I was in the middle of the mountain range, alone, far from any nearby town. Then I remembered something that was said on this program, that if you challenged witches, they could accept the challenge and manifest themselves. I don't understand why, but incredulously, with a bit of mockery, I said out loud, but not loud enough to be heard from a distance. Witches don't exist, and if they do, let one appear to me. I finished what I was doing. I got ready to return to the path. Just before reaching it, I found a very pretty, shiny stone. It caught my attention, and since I love nature, I decided to pick it up and take it home. I put it in my bag. Then I saw that the group was approaching. Now it was even clearer that the voices I had heard were not theirs. But I forgot about the matter. I joined them, and we continued on the route until we reached the town. Later, when I got home, I took out my keys and realized that I no longer had the stone I had picked up. I searched everywhere in the bags I was carrying, in my backpack. Not only did I not find it, I also realized that my wallet was missing. In it, I had my ID cards, with a photo and address. Obviously, I was worried about what could happen if someone with bad intentions found them. I had to cancel my cards, get my IDs back and all that, in the next few days, as soon as possible. When night fell, I got ready for bed. I went to bed as normal, but then I dreamed, or maybe not, that I woke up in my room, in the corner behind where my door closes. There was a black lump crouched down. When this lump realized that I was looking at it, it started to get up. I could see what it was when it stood up fully. It seemed like the witch from a fairy tale, with her black clothes, her long hair, but she had horns. Horns like a goat's, curved backwards, huge. Since her face was covered by her hair, it barely showed any of her features. A greenish skin, an extremely long nose. Her eyes emitted a green glow. I could see that her clothes seemed to be full of moss, branches, and dry leaves. She took a couple of steps towards me and started to laugh very slowly, but at the same time it was a witch's cackle. It reminded me of my worst childhood fears, but also of the laughter I had heard in the forest. I was paralyzed with fear, and when she took a third step, it was as if I woke up at that moment, opening my eyes and sitting up in bed. And at that moment, I stopped seeing her. Thank God. I stopped seeing her. I was sweating. I had tears in my eyes. I turned on the lamp on my nightstand and scanned the room with my eyes, every corner. I saw something on the floor, right where she had been standing moments before. It was a mask of a forest guardian. A mask I had made some time ago, which had been hanging in the same spot in my room for a couple of years. Far from there, it had horns made of branches and pointed wooden teeth. It was extremely strange, in fact, impossible for it to have fallen, but especially to have ended up in that corner of the room. In my confusion, I wanted to get out of bed, hang it up again, but when I was about to do it, before I could remove the blanket, it was as if a huge weight suddenly fell on me. I felt very sleepy all of a sudden. The bed seemed to pull me back. I fell asleep, leaving that mask on the floor and the lamp on. In the morning, I told my mom what had happened, about the dream or apparition. I also confessed what I had done in the mountain range, those words that for some reason I dared to say out loud. She told me that she had heard a thud during the early morning, when the mask fell. She told me that when she woke up and checked, she thought she caught a glimpse of a shadow jumping from her balcony onto the street. She also told me that this happened to me for being an idiot, for going around yelling things I didn't even understand. That day we burned incense throughout the house. When I went to bed, I lit a white candle in my room and then put a glass of water and grain salt under my bed. They told me it was a possible protection against bad energies. I was able to sleep peacefully, and I learned my lesson, which is what I can now tell you. Please, do not challenge witches, much less when you are in their territories. Do not provoke energies that you do not understand. And, well, simply, may God bless you. This story undoubtedly speaks a lot to us, community, about the behaviors we have as skeptics, many of us, until we have a first experience that makes us doubt the existence of something beyond what we can understand. And the thing is, it's one thing not to believe, and quite another to disrespect what we don't understand, to take it lightly. You know how you behave, but my recommendation, if you'll allow me to share it, is to respect everything we don't know, the beliefs of others. We continue with more stories tonight. Hello, Uriel. I really enjoy listening to your tales at night before bed, with my headphones on. I am a firm believer that there are definitely many things in this world without explanation. For example, what I'm about to tell you. This happened to my husband Fernando when he was coming home from the airport. He asked me to share this story with you. It was night when he was leaving Mexico City Airport, heading to Tlalnepantla. He decided to take A deserted detour, but one that would allow him to get home faster. He wanted to cross it as quickly as possible, since he understood that such an isolated place, far from everything, could be dangerous at the hour of the night. So, he was going at full speed. There were no other cars nearby, no houses, nothing. It was a huge empty plain where there was only grass, as far as you could see in that total darkness. At least that's what he imagined. The only thing he could see was what his car's headlights illuminated. Right there, out of nowhere. Something crossed the road. Something stood right in front of the path of the vehicle. It was so fast that he couldn't believe what he saw. It was a kind of huge dog, but it had no hair. Its skin was a bluish gray, and its face had no eyes. It had no ears or mouth, but there it was, standing right in front of him. He felt an impact on the fender. He braked. He couldn't avoid running over the creature. He felt it under the car. He felt the tires pass over it. Terrified by what he saw, he waited a few seconds to calm down, and then reversed. Slowly. Then he went back to the spot where he hit it. He found the tire marks from braking on the pavement, but nothing else. He moved closer to make sure there wasn't a single bloodstain. Not a drop. It didn't make sense. At that speed, with such a direct impact, logically what he thought was an animal should have been shattered. But there was nothing. Not the slightest trace. There were no other vehicles nearby. So, taking advantage of the shoulder, he began to shine his high beams around the surroundings. Nothing. Not a single sign of life. He got out of the car. The impact was real. The fender had suffered the consequences. It was completely smashed. He could only remove the hanging pieces to continue on his way. But he couldn't stop wondering what the hell that was. What was it doing there in the middle of the night? Why did it cross in front of him? And where had it gone? When he told me this at home, I told him that I believed it was something that wanted to harm him, that wanted to make him lose control. Something that wanted to take him that night, in an accident. Or maybe, I don't know, you tell me. But maybe it could have been a Nahual. I've heard on Tales of the Night that they are witches who can shapeshift into an animal form. Maybe that's what he saw, as it was returning to its original form. If you share this story, Uriel, allow me to ask the community, what do you all think? Good evening. The following story is something that happened to my cousin and some of her co-workers. She, in fact, hardly tells it. It was her mother, my aunt, who told us about it. All of this occurred in the state of Puebla, to be more exact, in San Sebastián, Zinacatepec. She is a police officer and was working her overnight shift, patrolling after 1 a.m. in a nearby town on the Ecatepec highway, right where the gas station is, one that is already far from the population. That's where she was when she received a report over the radio from her colleagues. They were requesting backup, as a vehicle had been stolen, which they had seen heading towards the highway, towards her. They told her they had seen it pass by the gas station. My cousin and her partner told them they were on their way, that they were close, and would remain in contact to report any developments. In addition, several patrol cars were also heading that way, but just as they were about to get on the highway, one of their tires blew out. They reported that and were told that another unit would then head in that direction, and that they should change the tire and then look along the alternate dirt roads where someone could hide even if they couldn't escape. That's what they did. They changed the tire, and as they headed off onto the road, they began to hear their colleagues' patrol cars approaching. They kept hearing their superior officer on the radio, who had taken the lead to reach the highway and then head down another of the more deserted roads they had to take. a road that got lost in the mountains, which was a route used by criminals. He was giving them instructions until they heard something strange over the radio. Suddenly there was silence, and then their superior officer began to shout in fear. They were no longer chasing someone. No, he was shouting the opposite. He was shouting that they were being overtaken, that it was overtaking them. He asked the driving officer to speed up more, that it was right behind them. All the town's officers headed that way. They thought they were being attacked, that they had perhaps fallen into an ambush by organized crime. No one knew how far they had ventured down that lonely road. No one knew how far they had gone. Their radio suddenly went off. They lost contact with them for a good while. My cousin and her partner drove their entire route and then returned to the meeting point, a few steps from the gas station. There they found their superior's patrol car, the one being pursued. Outside, its two occupants seemed to be in shock and were being attended to by other officers. Then they saw that the other officers and even gas station personnel were shining flashlights into the bushes, as if searching for something. They quickly approached their colleagues to ask what was happening. One of the officers told them what their companions said they had seen before losing communication. They said they had gone down the road until any trace of light or the main road had been left far behind, at the limit of their headlight beams. Suddenly, they saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. It seemed to be the silhouette of a very tall man, dressed in black. When the light began to illuminate him, the glow of a pair of red dots appeared at eye level. It seemed that these eyes were closer to them than that man. They felt fear, but continued moving slowly towards him. They couldn't stop approaching, knowing they were in search of a suspect. But when they were just a few meters away, just a few meters closer, that man raised his arms. That man, if he can be called that thing, showed its wings, and in 2 leaps it left the road. Out of the reach of their lights, already in the darkness, one of the occupants of the patrol car swore he had seen it take flight. The driver swerved to make a U-turn and started to move away from there as quickly as possible, trying to reach the highway. That's when they took the radio to report what they had just seen. But at that very moment, a dull buzzing made the passenger look back. Those red eyes were coming closer. That figure was approaching along the road at full speed. It was following the patrol car, getting closer and closer. And he began to shout at his partner to speed up, that it was about to overtake them. About to. Those were the voices that had been heard on the radio. Hey, say that thing came closer and moved away from the patrol car, as if showing them how easy it would be to overtake them if it wanted to. The road was terrible, but the driver didn't care and accelerated along it, even though it seemed the patrol car was about to fall apart. After a few eternal minutes, they finally reached the highway, but they were going so fast that they were losing control. The nerves, the speed, the damage the vehicle had suffered on that road were all coming together. On a curve, a speeding semi-truck was coming, as they often do on that stretch, and they were about to crash head-on, were it not for the fact that, somehow, the truck driver managed to maneuver at the last second to avoid an accident. Afterwards, they finally arrived at the gas station. They told all the workers there. They described the man in black, the winged man who had followed them, and then disappeared. Upon arriving at the stretch where they encountered the truck, an area, in fact, very well known for being full of tales, sightings, accidents, they heard a sound again, from the bushes, as if he were nearby. That's why they sent everyone to search. My aunt comments that on that day, my cousin's late father surely watched over her, that somehow he blew out her tire, so they wouldn't be the first ones to take the highway, to reach that lonely road, to avoid encountering that, whatever it was. Thanks for listening to my story. Thank you, Uriel, if you get to share it. I'll keep listening on Spotify and will be attentive as always to the upcoming episodes. A hug to everyone in the community. Thank you for sharing this story. I think many people in the community are already thinking of a certain creature, a certain legend, that may have been the one featured in the previous story. Leave it in a comment if we're all thinking the same thing. But okay, now let's move on to that story I told you about at the beginning. If you are suggestible when listening to tales at night, if you believe that what you hear can somehow transcend reality or attract energies towards you, it's probably best to end this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. But if you decide to continue, we ask you please, seriously, not to become suggestible. Thank you for listening to these tales of the night. And on to this last story for today. Hello Tales of the Night community. During the pandemic, in the midst of quarantine and loneliness, I decided to download Spotify, an app that until then hadn't seemed very appealing to me. Then, shortly after, while chatting with my coworkers about paranormal experiences, about those even small, even doubtful moments that we all have to share, a friend recommended we listen to Tales of the Night, which, at the time, was a new program on the platform. I didn't look for it right away, but after a few weeks, suddenly that image, that nun in the recommendations, an image that seemed very striking to me, as it reminded me of the Conjuring movies, which I really enjoy. The first story I listened to was a classic from the channel, The Crucifix of Father Lucas. I remember very well a part narrated in Latin, preceded by a warning about what we were about to hear. Luckily they did that. I've had very bad experiences with the paranormal, and of course I skipped that part. Since then I've listened to every episode. I followed all the social media. Anyway, I became a huge fan of the program. But of course, the story doesn't end there. And Uriel always tells us that eventually, we could be the protagonists of a story. And I, community, unfortunately already am. I don't know if you noticed that a few months ago, the story of The Crucifix of Father Lucas was re-uploaded, again in parts. A few days ago when I opened Spotify, it recommended that episode to me again, and even though I knew it almost by heart, I decided to listen to it again, download it on my way to work, and then on my way home. That's the only way I listen to it. My mom doesn't like that kind of thing playing here at home. When I got to chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken, when I got to that phrase, that damn phrase in Latin, I was distracted, thinking about something else, listening without listening, and I didn't skip that sentence, that invocation or whatever it was, but I had no awareness of what I had heard until night fell. I sleep with my son, always with a nightlight on. Here you can't sleep in complete darkness because of another incident I'll tell you about later. That night I felt a need to hug my son because I felt he was going to roll off to the edge, that he was going to fall. I needed to hold him back in my dream, and I stretched out my hand behind me. I stretched it out like that, without fully waking up, without opening my eyes, and I felt his hand resting on mine. But as if he were waking up, I began to become aware. I began to realize that that hand was not his. I opened my eyes. My hand was behind my back, but the child was in front of me, with both his little hands on his chest. I quickly pulled my hand away and turned around, but there was nothing. Only darkness, unless there was something hiding in it. However, things didn't end there. The next day, in that same room, I was assembling a toy with building blocks for him. I was really engrossed while watching a movie just to have some background noise. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. From my window, all you can see is a park across the street in the back. Only by getting really close and looking down can I see my neighbor's patio. That night there wasn't a single sound beyond the TV when, coming from outside, like from below the window, I clearly heard that rattle sound. The sound the Harlequin made in that crucifix story. I didn't pay attention, and it's because since it was the sound from a story, I thought I was just being suggestible, especially since I had realized that this time I hadn't skipped ahead to that phrase. Still, I got up to close the curtain. But someone knocked on the window. Someone knocked almost right in front of me. I didn't want to open the curtain to see, but it was impossible for something to knock on a 3rd floor window. That night, I went to sleep with a terrible feeling of unease. Something told me there was someone else in that room or behind the curtain. Fatigue and fear were competing. I clung to my son and wanted to stay awake, but my eyes kept closing. I heard something outside. Something at the window. I took my son out of there, and we slept in the living room. Luckily, he didn't even wake up. This was 3 days ago. I've gone back to sleeping in the room, and sometimes I stop feeling that presence. Maybe it was just my suggestion. I think that's most likely. I think it would be crazy to think of anything more, that my favorite story could turn against me. Thank you for your attention, community, and above all, thank you for believing me.